Welcome back. Now, we're still in the viewport here, and we've learned quite a lot about the viewport so far, but one of the main uses of the viewport is to be able to manipulate the objects in our world that we can see here. Now, we can select objects in our world by simply left-clicking on them, and we see that they become outlined, and in addition to the outline, we see this widget. And the widget has three arrows. These arrows correspond to directions. We call them axes in space. Axes are aligned with our world coordinate system. The blue upright arrow represents the z-axis, which runs up and down. The green represents the y-axis, and the red represents the x-axis. Now, at the very bottom left of the viewport, it's so small you might have missed it, there's a smaller version of this gizmo. And as I rotate my view, notice that it's rotating. This little gizmo down here is aligned with world coordinates. It lets us know which direction is the x, y, or z direction. You can think of x and y as sort of north and south in a way, and the z, of course, points up towards the sky. Now, the gizmo that shows up when we select objects informs us that we're in translation mode. And this brings us to the icons at the top right of our viewport. The four leftmost icons allow us to switch between different methods of manipulating objects. The leftmost icon says select objects in its tooltip, and its hotkey is Q. If I hit Q, I'm simply selecting objects. I don't have that gizmo anymore. And if I go to the next icon, it says select and translate objects, and we can use W to switch to that, and we get the gizmo. Now, translate means we can move them around in the world. Notice if I click on one of the arrows in the gizmo, I can drag and move the object in that world coordinate axis direction. So I can move the object up in the z direction, or in the positive y direction, or back into the negative y direction, and of course forward and backward in the x direction. Now, the gizmo has the ability to select two axes simultaneously. That's why we have these little square connectors that connect each pair of arrows. So I can select both the y and z axes simultaneously by hovering over on that little square, and I see that both arrows are highlighted, and I'm now moving in both the y and the z directions. If I zoom out, I'll see that I'm moving in what's known as the YZ plane. We're changing the y and z, but not the x. Now, next to the translation icon, we have rotation. And we see that E is the shortcut, so if I hit the E key or click on this icon, my gizmo changes to a rotation gizmo. And I can rotate about these three axes. Notice the blue arc rotates the object about the z-axis. The red rotates about the x-axis, and the green rotates about the y-axis. So that's how we can rotate our object around. Now, next to rotation, we have the scale object manipulation mode, which can be accessed with the R shortcut. And now we see that we have yet another version of the gizmo where each handle has a box at the end. This allows us to scale the mesh in the corresponding direction. If I want to scale it in the Z direction, you'll see that it's getting taller. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Now, if I scale it in the X, it gets longer. And if I scale it in the Y, it gets fatter, sort of like a couch. Now, Control Z will allow me to undo those operations, so that's a very useful thing to know. Now, you're probably noticing that as we switch between these various modes and we manipulate our object, that our object is not moving smoothly. It's snapping by increments. And that's because snapping is enabled for these objects. And that's what these three icons are for. The three icons which have blue attached to them. This one here that looks like a grid says enables or disables snapping to the grid when dragging objects around. So if I click that blue icon, we see that snapping is now no longer enabled. And I can drag the object and it will no longer snap by discrete increments. It will now move in a more smooth manner. Now, if I hit E to go into rotation mode, I'm still snapping when I'm rotating. And you'll see that the value on the gizmo is showing me how many degrees I've rotated by. Oftentimes, we'll want to rotate something by 90 degrees, so we can do that easily this way, or 180 degrees. But sometimes we don't want to snap, so we can disable snapping right here. The little angle icon that's blue. If I click it, it's no longer blue, and I can rotate in a smooth manner. I'm no longer snapping by increments. And that's what the values next to the snap icons are for. They determine how many units to snap by. If I enable snapping for rotation mode and I change this 10 to 45 degrees, now when I rotate, I'm snapping by increments of 45 degrees. And if I re-enable snapping for translation and hit W to get my translation widget back, I can change the snap amount to, say, 500. And now when I drag, I will only snap by increments of 500. I'm going to put that back down to 10 and put my rotational snap value back to 10 as well. And of course, scaling has snapping enabled as well. If I hit the R key to go back to scale mode, you'll notice that we are scaling by discrete increments. But if I disable snapping for scale mode, now I can scale more smoothly. So snapping is very powerful. You'll want to use it in certain situations and disable it for others. Now, the only two icons left are these two here. Let's talk about this one. Now, depending on the mode of object manipulation you're in, you might see a box with some lines on it, or you might see a circle or a world. This icon cycles us between world coordinates and local or object coordinates. Now, if we're in world coordinate space, which we are now, as indicated by the world icon, the gizmo here shows us the world directions. This red arrow is pointing in the world X direction. It's like holding a compass and saying, that's north. But if I click that world icon and change it to a box, notice the X-axis is now skewed. It's no longer pointing at the true world X-axis direction. It's actually now pointing in the chair's own X-axis direction. We typically think of an object's local X as its forward direction. So X is pointing in the chair's forward direction. And if I cycle back to world coordinates, we see that the gizmo will change and point to the world X direction. So keep your eyes on the gizmo as I cycle between local and world space. So that's that icon, and it can be useful if you'd like to move an object relative to its own local coordinates, or if you'd like to move it in the world coordinate directions. And next to this icon, we finally have this one that says control how objects snap to surfaces. If we enable this, then we can see how it works by dragging in a new static mesh into the world. So I'm going to hit Control Space to bring up my content drawer. And because we started our project with starter content, in the content folder, we have a starter content folder. And in this folder, I'm going to double click on props. Here we have lots of static meshes, including some of the ones we see in our world. Now, I'm going to bring in one of these static meshes, and doing so is as simple as clicking on it and dragging it in. Now, this bush here is snapping to the floor. I haven't released the mouse button yet, and as I drag it around, we see that it's staying snapped to the surface of the floor. And if I release, well, there it is. It's now in the world. Now, surface snapping can be turned off. And if that's off, then if I bring in another object, for example, another static mesh bush, well, we see it sort of clipping through the floor there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now, surface snapping allows us to alter the way that these objects snap to surfaces. If I change the surface offset to, say, 100, then if I go ahead and bring in another one of these bushes, notice that it's offset from the ground by 100 units. Now, if you're wondering what 100 means, 100 units in Unreal Engine corresponds to 100 centimeters by default. So one Unreal Engine unit is a centimeter. Now, usually we like our objects to snap to the ground rather than hover by 100. So I'm going to click that icon and change my surface offset back to 0. And I'm done with this bush, so I'm going to go ahead and select it and remove it from my world by pressing the delete key, and I've now deleted it. So we know how to manipulate objects around. The last thing I'm going to show you is how to duplicate them. So I have my bush here. Let's say I'd like a second one. I can duplicate this bush by holding the Alt key and clicking and dragging one of these handles on the translation widget, and that allows me to duplicate it. Now I can select multiple objects by selecting one, holding Shift and selecting another, and now I have two selected. Now if I'd like to duplicate both of them, I can hold Alt and click and drag one of the handles in the gizmo, and I have now duplicated both of them. So duplication works by holding Alt and translating objects, but we can also duplicate by rotating as well. If I select one of these bushes and hit the E key, I'm in rotation mode, and if I hold Alt as I rotate this bush, notice that I've rotated a duplicate. And if I bring it aside, I'll see that I have now two bushes where there was only one before. So duplication works with translation and rotation. So we have the icons that allow us to switch between the different manipulation modes, but we're mostly going to be using the hotkeys W, E, and R to switch between translation, rotation, and scale mode. Great job. I'll see you in the next lecture.